This is episode 39, day 40 of Days of America. Today I wanted to talk about a book that I finished in the past few days, Ornament and Crime by Loos. When I first read this book, I thought that most of it is just ignorant and throwing the baby out with the bathwater. After the second read, I realized that there were a lot of subtleties and subtle ideas that Loos tries to communicate with the reader that at first don't come through. But I still think that he's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And in this video, I'm going to try to explain why I think this and what I think about Ornament and Crime. So, as a bit of context, Ornament and Crime is both the title of an essay wrote in 1908 and a series of essays from 1896 towards the end of the life of Loos. And when I say Ornament and Crime, I refer to the essay series, not just a single essay with the same title. These essays were written in a time period when the Vienna secession was starting to take place. And most of what Loos has written is a reaction against the secession, against the forms and the shapes that the secession proposed. Another important contextual point is that before the Industrial Revolution, the dominant style of the previous centuries was Baroque and Rococo. And with the Industrial Revolution, the production of these styles with their specific ornamentation and decor was becoming cheaper and cheaper. Loos is coming from this context where ornament became just a form of decor, cheap with false materials, wood imitating marble, and plaster detailings. And what he criticizes is this historical period. He argues, I'm trying to communicate the key points, that one, ornament is the product of a degenerate and backward civilization. And for this, he brings up the example of the tattooing of Papuan and indigenous tribes which still live in the Stone Age, civilization-wise. That in those cultures, tattooing and ornamenting of one's skin is prevalent. And because of this, ornament can be linked to a degenerate society and a degenerate person. He likens this activity to criminals. With this claim, if we look around in today's society, most often when we see a tattooed person, he is probably a criminal. But since tattooing became more and more fashionable in the 80s and the 90s, a lot of non-criminal people are tattooed as well. This is one of his arguments. A second one is that ornamentation is wasteful and just takes advantage of the craftsman because ornamentation is much cheaper than a purer form that he would design, and because of this, the worker doesn't get paid enough for a lot more work. Returning to the backwardness and the civilizational contrast of ornament versus simpleness. He says that today's civilization, today's society in which he lives is much more evolved and much more complex than to have ornament. They went past ornament, went past the need of using ornament to communicate certain ideas, and that the society that he envisions will suffice with the purity, the clearness of logic, rationality, and form that result from these processes. And thirdly, as I hinted before, he argues that a more developed and more intellectual society will find beauty in the purity and rationality of form. This and the ideas that belong to his Ornament and Crime series of essays are the ideas that laid part of the groundwork of modernism and modernist thinking. Now, these are the key points. Of course, everything is much more subtle, like he critiques historicism, he critiques the neo-Gothic and neoclassical styles of the 19th century, but still admits that the architect of the future that is going to be successful and going to be fine-tuned to the needs of his era is going to be well-versed and well-learned in the classical language of architecture. He looked up as an example to the ancient Romans and ancient Greeks because of their proportional and aesthetic perfectness, if that word exists. I think that there are contradictions in what he says, and I think that there are overreaches as well. For example, saying that ornament is useless and we should strip away everything I don't think that that is correct. I think that architecture is just like this tree, for example, with its roots deep underground, deep in history, and its branches reaching up to the sky. You can't cut down the tree and say that I want a new tree if this is the only one that you have, if you either way are going to build on the precedent that you have. So I believe that architecture should follow an evolutionary cycle, keeping what worked from history, keeping the language of the historical styles, and reinterpreting and using them in a contemporary way, not in the forced contemporary way that the governments and institutions try to oppress on the people, but as an outcome of living in a certain time, building with that time's technologies. Also, he reduces ornament as just pure, meaningless beautification of simple everyday objects. But I don't see how ornament can be reduced to such a simple and banal thing. In the Gothic cathedrals, in the ancient styles and the historical styles of architecture and also painting and sculpture, ornament had deep meaning related to it. Not just pure beautification, but everything that was added onto a column had some kind of meaning, communicated some kind of idea. Taking away this meaning from our buildings makes our neighborhoods and our cities sterile. People are beauty-oriented creatures, but we don't suffice with an intellectually constructed idea of beauty, but rather with the one that has evolved with us, that is ingrained in our genes, in our preferences. For example, very simply, symmetry is something that is ingrained in us as beautiful. There is a very good Kurzgesagt video about beauty and about how people think about and relate to beautiful things. And it's clearly visible when we either compare a classical building, a historical style building, with a modern building that most people who aren't ideologically biased towards the modernist one are going to prefer the historical building. This is reflected in our habits of vacationing, of traveling. Everyone wants to go to Italy. Everyone wants to go to France, to visit the old cities, the cobblestone cities, the limestone cities with 800 or 1,000-year-old houses. Everyone wants to go there. It's not because we are stupid, but because there exists a preference towards tradition and history in architecture. And as it happened with many other things in the 20th century, like with communism, for example, we can't say in today's day and age that, oh, we haven't tried it, so we don't know, and we can't make an educated judgment of the thing that is proposed. We have tried modernism, we have tried the ideals that have been worked out at the beginning of the 20th century, and we see where they lead us, and we see that it is not good. So we can confidently and self-assuredly say that ornament is not a crime when it is executed with care and with precision. Because if we look at ornament as something that holds meaning and thus communicates some deeper idea with us through the built environment, then executing an ornament in a bad way could be considered a crime. But purely adding ornaments to deepen the message and meaning of a building shouldn't be considered a crime, in my view. And here's another important thing, that a house isn't a house just as a definition, 4 walls and the roof. That's not a house. A house is something that conveys meaning to a person. And what I think has happened with the proposition of ornament being crime is this reduction. That ornament is purely something that tries to beautify a functional object and nothing else. No, ornament is a message. It's like a letter that you write. Also, with rejecting ornament and preferring simplicity, there is a presumption that simplicity is progress. While if we look back in history, all of the most prosperous and most forward-looking times were extremely complex periods in humanity's life. Anyways, this was episode 39. See you tomorrow. Bye.